Hi, I'm Ginger Zumeta, CEO of Motive3, and I'm here with Emma Burdett, who leads our design practice. And we've been having a conversation that we're just going to continue here. And really what we've been talking about is how brand identity and company culture and the people inside a company kind of play a role in brand authenticity, and how that all comes together in an AI world where when you're using AI to kind of generate content and generate messaging, a lot of times what it's going to do is resort to the mean. So how do you actually distinguish yourself when we're using these tools that basically everybody is using? So I think let's just kick off the conversation. Emma, you were talking a little bit about people inside a company and company culture, and specifically a project you were sort of working on where you uncovered a new insight. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, getting back to what is a brand and what's the purpose of a brand, it's really about influencing how people think, how they feel, how they behave. And I think a lot of companies, when they're wanting to build their brand, they're really thinking about how do we build that brand externally in order to influence customers and gain come closer to our target audience. I think the one thing that's really exciting in this age of AI, though, is how do we leverage real people and the people inside our company to become evangelists for our brand. And so I think it's a different way of thinking about brand building, which is not necessarily externally, and the image that we're projecting to an audience that maybe doesn't know us and then comes to find us organically, but really how do we create a very strong brand identity within the company that creates a culture, informs the people working there, and then they can become the advocates for your brand that has its own influence. So I think it's something that's like a different way of thinking. I'd love to also hear, Ginger, just like in your experience, how much does culture, how problem aware, I guess, are clients around culture and wanting to have that be specifically addressed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think my answer has probably changed over the years, right? I mean, a decade or more ago, it really used to be about, what's our big message, or kind of what's our tagline, and how do we get everybody to promote that? And it was really mostly communications coming from the company. I mean, a lot of that shifted for all the reasons, digital, social, et cetera, and we've kind of shifted more to following opinions. One of the things I've noticed even on our LinkedIn strategy, and when we're working with clients on kind of messaging strategy, is that we're seeing a lot more that the leaders in the company and the communicators in the company are really carrying the conversation, because people like to follow people. People don't really like to follow companies. In very rare circumstances do people want to follow companies, and that's usually when that company has already broken through, right? Like it's a big kind of blue chip company, the Nikes, the Coca-Colas of the world. But unless you're at that point, you're really mostly tracking people, Richard Branson, et cetera. And so I think what's interesting is it gets to this concept that we've been talking a lot about, with AI now. I can't believe it's been a year, right, that ChatGPT has been out in the world, but it gets to that concept of thought leadership, right? And how does thought leadership play into a company's way that they communicate, which gets to what you were talking about, really, which is culture. And I think it's hard, right? Because unless we build messaging playbooks for companies, and part of the reason I think they're powerful is because you need to train the people inside first on at least what's the master message. They're gonna translate those stories into whatever they translate them into, but that's what creates a culture inside the company. And so, yeah, I'm kind of, I want to hear more about your idea about this, but I think culture is it's almost everything now. I'm with you. I think it becomes almost more important than what you say. Wait a minute, I got to think about that. Do I believe that? As important as what you say externally is, are you walking the talk and breathing the culture internally. Because if you're doing that, I think it will get out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think that, there's an element of trying to read the tea leaves here. And I work with a lot of startups, and I think startups too, because they're so young, they really rely on founders to be the voice of the company, to evangelize their team, to get faith from investors and stakeholders. And we definitely live in a time where the founders and CEOs of companies are their own celebrities. I mean, look at Elon Musk. So, but I also think like something that I'm noticing that's happening on social media, like TikTok, is people having really great brand experiences with like the foundation of a company, the foundational level, like the customer service team. Someone might contact an airline having a problem and talking to someone on the phone, customer service. And if that person goes above and beyond to deliver like the best level of service, that person's going to talk about it on TikTok. And then it's such an extraordinary event in this age of AI, in the age of like call centers, that it becomes something that people want to evangelize and speak about. And I think that there's something really cool about how do we empower the people in our own company to become really proud of the products that we deliver, the services that we deliver, in a way that connects back to the customer. And then in turn, I think that like kind of builds its own influence. So I can almost imagine that we're going to get to a point where it's not just the founders of companies that are really leading the culture. There's a culture that exists within the brand itself that extends to all the different employees. And if they become the advocates for that brand, they build their own centers of influence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because I think a lot of times, and this is changing, right? Depending on a company's maturity, it gets harder and harder as you scale, right? When you're startup, people are 1 to 2 degrees away from the founder. They get the ethos. They're working at a startup because they dig that culture, right? When you get to a big kind of enterprise level company, it gets harder and harder. But I think, a lot of times what happens along the way is companies underestimate the value and the organic story making and storytelling that happens in those interactions that you're talking about, right? I mean, because those are the things that can go viral, that get shared, and that really, I think the reason they're so powerful is they are less manufactured, less polished, right? Like, which means a lot of times they're hitting those emotional, touch points in a much more resonant way, and that's how they end up kind of getting into the wider world and shaping what the brand is perceived as.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's the unexpected value that a company is bringing to its customers that becomes the thing that sets them apart and differentiates them. And it makes me think back to some of the work that we've done in deep customer interviews with our clients, where we talk to their customers, we kind of investigate what their experience was like working with the product and working with the team. And the value of that process is uncovering the little nuggets of surprise that they've been delivered, and it's never the thing that the client or the brand thinks that they're delivering to their customer. It's always something else, and it's generally has to do with like the level of service and the people behind the brand. And once you uncover that, you can kind of like connect the dots that there's something inherent about the culture of that brand that can get tied back into their messaging and really unlock something for how to differentiate them through messaging.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I totally agree, but it's what I'm curious about is like, how do you take those insights, right? And we've done this with a few companies, but for companies that aren't hiring us, let's say, how do you take those insights and make sure that they get back into the wider base of the team at the company. Because when we talk about culture, there's a tension there that you and I talk about a lot, which is a lot of it's organic, but it does need to be directed, right? It can't be a free-for-all. You need sort of guidelines and guardrails in terms of, if we decided this is who we are, this is who we're for, and this is why we're doing it and how we do it better, why we deserve to win, that needs to be sort of the thread that follows through. So I'm just kind of curious about, in terms of some of the work that you do, and like on the startup side, I think it happens more organically, but as the team starts to grow, it starts to get away from you a little bit, and kind of what are some ideas that you have in terms of like how you can make sure that you're always providing that feedback loop back into the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's necessary as startups grow that there's a shift or transition from the founder being the message and the core of that message, to then kind of passing the baton, and the product is part of the brand and the people within the organization are part of the brand. And I think a lot of that just comes from listening. And so I think it comes from hearing from your employees. What do they find valuable about the company? What are the things that they like about the product? And then in turn, customer interviews. I think that that's something that you can do, not just hiring a consultant, but really understanding your customer. And so I think it comes from like a deep listening and kind of uncovering the pattern of information that you're hearing back. Like what are the things that you're speaking out into the world that are kind of boomeranging back to you? And that generally kind of drawing some circles around it can tell you a little bit what your value and your messaging that's really resonating with both your team and your audience.
Yeah, I think that the other thing I love, the concept of listening is so important. And I think sometimes we're hearing, but we're not listening. And you have to actually pause to go back and go like, what have I been hearing from my clients, from my team? And so one of these concepts that we did with one of the clients that we worked on together was story mining, right? Like, how do we kind of talk to a bunch of people internally, just ask them questions that help them unlock the stories that they've actually had in them all along. And I think there's something kind of magical to asking people to tell their stories of a client interaction where, maybe something wasn't going as planned, and, there had to be an intervention to kind of course correct something. And how did that go? And what was the result of that? And I think, when we're on our kind of hamster wheel of the day-to-day stuff, a lot of times we don't stop and go like, oh yeah, we're collecting this library of stories that has a lot of power, and they're very relatable to other clients, right? Because there's going to be that other, that next client or the next customer that has in there, we always talk about, resistance, red flags, and rebuttals, that is afraid something is going to happen. And there's probably a story already in the company that can speak to that and kind of lower the anxiety level of someone kind of walking into a new experience.
For sure, for sure. I think one of the things I love about Motive 3 is that we work remotely. And I think the challenge of a lot of companies working remotely is that you're eliminating the opportunity for a lot of spontaneous conversation that sometimes can reveal these anecdotes and storytelling. But I think one of the things that's really beautiful about Motive 3 is how we have these kind of open discussions to really go into like, let's talk about some of the projects. Let's talk about some of the things that you're thinking about. And it all intertwines and comes back to a little bit of like revealing the story mining on like the work that we're doing, insights, maybe some customer feedback that we've gotten, as well as like, the things that are on our mind too, that are informing the way that we practice our work. So I'd love to, I think one of the things that maybe could be insightful is just how your approach has been in providing opportunity for having those conversations, whether with clients or team. I also have noticed, Ginger, like I love when we're having meetings with clients, when you just pause and you're like, how did that land with you? Is there something we could do better? Like, how have you reinforced providing opportunity to listen?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good, it's a good question. I don't know. I think that I've been told that, you know, working with clients, I've got this ability to like, I'm constantly trying to like listen to put a lot of things together. I'm big into pattern recognition. And so to be honest, I think I do it subconsciously a lot because I'm usually looking for some little kernel that I can feel it when it's popped, right? And so a lot of times what I'll do, and even going into client engagements, I always have to excuse myself at the beginning and say for those that are old enough to remember, like that I'm going to be kind of like Columbo. I'm going to ask a lot of really basic, seemingly stupid, like, kind of like you should know this already questions, because I think that when you ask the fundamental questions, like, where do you deserve to win?
Mm.
Or like, they might have been kind of like so stuck in their narrative of like, this is what we're really good at, and we have this feature, et cetera, et cetera. And you can kind of go back and just say like, okay, well, do you deserve to win, head to head against, the next best alternatives in this? And it's like, no, maybe not. Okay, well, where might you deserve to win? So I think there's sort of a Socratic method that I have, which is just curiosity and asking questions. I guess that's the short way to answer your question, is like, I'm highly curious. I usually don't take the first answer as the best and last answer. I kind of want to know what's behind that answer. And I think it's a practice that you get better with over time. Consultants have to kind of get good at this, but I think it a lot of times offers, the team that you're interacting with, whether it's an internal team or an external team or customers, to kind of sit and for themselves have to go through that thought process in their own minds before they answer it. Like, well, let me think about what my answer is to this. And when you can have that happen, when you can get an answer that isn't an automatic answer, like things have happened inside them, like chemical things have happened inside of them that they remember. And a lot of times that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get something sticky. Like, what have we experienced, or what have you experienced, or what about, kind of dealing with the product is an experience that's stuck. And a lot of times it's not the ones that they're pushing on the website or pushing in their, kind of keynote speeches and town halls and stuff like that. It can be something, as easy as we had one client where we asked a lot of questions, and one of the things that just kept coming back over and over again is, they just, they really just laid it all out for us. Like, they were holding our hand through the whole process. We never had to worry about like, how are we going to accomplish the next step? And that wasn't the product, but it was the service component that kind of made that product really sticky.
And so when you, I guess, unveil or uncover these kind of emotional anecdotes, how does that, because when I think of a messaging strategy, or I think of a messaging playbook, I imagine that there's a structure to it. There's a little bit of a formula to it. How do you take these kind of maybe messy stories and then filter it back into something that can be very strategic and adopted by company-wide? Because I imagine there's like a layer of simplicity to take these and then have evangelize lots of people singing from the same songbook, essentially.
Yeah, it's so the reality is that when you build a messaging playbook, it's going to have, different fidelity or different kind of altitudes for different people, for the communicators in a company, which they could be the marketing people, but they also could be salespeople. They can be like, the founder and the executive team that are communicating at a different level. What we typically do, right, when we're building sort of the most basic level of a messaging playbook, is you want to know what the big brand promise is. You want to know kind of like, what are the core messaging pillars that are going to support that brand promise. And then you want to start to click down into, how does that show up in the product? And you're going to look at, features and benefits and stuff like that. There's another click down after that, which is really proof points, right? And proof points can be stories, right? And so I think that a messaging playbook, it's in the core of it, sort of like the nucleus of the messaging playbook are those messaging pillars and those core concepts. The proof points can be very dynamic, right? Because it's going to be a case study with this client. It's going to be an interaction with it could be a service call, right? A service call interaction with another client. And those need to be somewhat dynamic, and they need to be collected, and different parts of the organization are going to use different pieces of those. The funny thing about it, though, the ironic thing about it in some ways is, yes, you want to collect these, but what really happens, right? Yes, you've got this sort of like documented, messaging playbook, and here's some of the stories. But what really happens is that the process of doing that, like when you tell those stories and you uncover those stories stick. They're just in people's subconscious now, and so they're the ones that keep the stories alive and kind of retell those stories. And so I think that, a lot of times the process of building the playbook sort of is the product of the playbook, because you're kind of unlocking these stories that people will tell organically on their own. I mean, that's been my experience. What's your sense?
No, I agree. And I think also the process of building the playbook with the team helps to kind of align everyone together to really understand what their value is, what their promise is. And it inherently, through that, like the building of the book, everyone kind of comes together too. And I think that that's a really cool byproduct of the work that we do. And then you have the documentation that then can kind of guide future activities. But I think one of the things I'm curious about is, how do you build on top of this? Like, now that you've created the playbook, I imagine there's a piece of, like, a large piece of this work is about understanding the DNA of the company and the brand identity. And like, this is something that is everlasting, evergreen. But how does the playbook maybe adapt, or when do customers or clients have to check in on their playbook to kind of evolve it over time?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, right? Let me kind of break down the process a little bit of the playbook. Like, there's steps that get you to the playbook. There's some steps that need to happen immediately after the playbook, and then there's like some steps that really do need to be ongoing, right? And so the steps that lead to the playbook are, I think the most important, like often forgotten practice that companies really need to do is like to do their positioning. You exist in an environment, right, of competitors and a landscape of an industry, and industries are going through their life cycles as your company is going through their life cycle and all that stuff. So you have to do the positioning work. Now, this is going to get to one of the later steps. But the landscape is always changing. It's not fixed, right? So you can't just do that and then like move on and nothing has changed. New competitors enter, some fall away. There's consolidation of categories as they mature, et cetera. So you have to do your sort of positioning work. I always consider the positioning work as the first domino that knocks over like all the subsequent dominoes when you're doing a playbook, because once you have the position, now you've got something unique and special in terms of, this is where we deserve to win. You build your messaging pillars in the playbook around that. The next part, harder part, is now you need to implement this playbook, right? And so that's where you take it back to the company. You do workshops inside the company to kind of unlock it for everybody else, show them kind of how it works. And there you start doing some additional listening and story mining, like, what's an instance that you've had in your, area of the company where, this kind of narrative has played out. You do that stuff. A lot of times what happens, and you and I, this is where we kind of intersect a lot, is as soon as you've gotten that playbook, you realize, we might need to take another look at our website. What are we actually saying there? What are we actually saying in our sales materials? How are we recruiting, right? How are we actually recruiting people to be able to kind of fulfill this? And so there's usually this sort of sticky window where you need to kind of, okay, we got to pull back. We got to take care of some low hanging fruit and fix those things before we now kind of, move on. And then, after that, I think in a perfect world, you're doing somewhat quarterly sprints on here's how we're pushing, this particular narrative that we think is foundational to who we are. You look at, this is where you get into more kind of classic marketing. What are the channels where the people that we are here to serve are kind of paying attention? You can do social listening in those channels to see what people are actually saying. You can go to forums and, get the real of like what people are actually talking about in terms of products or category types, et cetera, et cetera. And then you need to go and adjust that stuff on an ongoing basis. And then I would say at least annually, you need to come back and just gut check yourself on the positioning in the landscape to see, is anything critical happening? It could be regulatory, it could be something that's happening regionally, it could be something where like the category itself is changing. We know that I mean, OpenAI has changed how we think about content. Just in that's a cataclysmic change, right? If you just kind of proceed with your, I've got my playbook and I'm going to keep running my plays, the sports metaphor is very good, right? Like you have a playbook, but like you may need to adapt your playbook if you're playing a different style team, right? And so you got to make those changes and stay with it all the time. But I'm super interested to come back to you in terms of that moment, right? Like the critical moment where we go from an intellectual exercise, as fun as it is, of like coming up with a playbook, to like, we now need to install this, which is kind of where a lot of the work that you do comes in. How do you're masterful at translating strategy into design and into kind of, the things that people are actually encountering. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your process in terms of like, how do you go from playbook into the actual things that people are going to interact with, like the website and materials, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think the strategy, I've been in a kind of a poetic way, I've been thinking like the strategy is sort of the seance that we have to go through in order to conjure like the creative gods to inspire the work that is to come. And so I think doing this kind of, it's always trust the process. You do this like really deep strategy work, you come up with a playbook, and then hopefully there's this kind of spark that happens and you don't really know where it comes from, but it informs a lot of the work that's to come. And there's, of course, websites are so important. Our social media now is so important. All of these things have different textures to the message and the way that they should show up. So thinking through audiences, what they expect a website to do is going to be slightly different than what they maybe expect to see on your Instagram versus what they might expect to see on your LinkedIn. And but that's also the fun of playing and not just having one message that you're rigorously, spouting on all of these, but then adding nuance to how your message is expressed, and connecting and building kind of a robust personality to your brand. I think the thing that I'm very excited about in websites is really thinking through that audiences just want to access information. And I think there was a little bit of like this design phase in websites where there's a lot of bells and whistles, there's a lot of interaction design. And now we're getting to this point where websites are being seen on lots of different screens. I mean, people have a screen on their wrist, they have a screen on their refrigerator. Like you can really access a website in so many different places. And so websites have to be super responsive. And you don't want them to take a long time to load. And so thinking through like, I think all these different channels have different use cases. How do you create your message, not just words, but also visually to express what your value is? And so if your value is simplicity, your value is providing information, how do you make that experience as seamless as possible on something like a website? Or what's the information that you really want to provide on Instagram?
So that makes me think of two things. One where I'm going to challenge you a little bit, and another one that is just kind of like an interesting rabbit hole to go down, right? So, okay. First, I'm going to say them both. That way we can decide how we want to have this conversation. But the one thing is, what happens when, and we've experienced this with clients, right? Where you go through the exercise, the strategy, like, you've got the fist bumps, everyone's loving it. It's like just great work, except, right, the stakeholder, sometimes the founder, sometimes another key executive, still, so we know what to do, right? We know what the website needs, etc. We know what we need to say, but then there's that personality, right, of the founder who still has like sort of a vision of exactly what they want, which we don't always agree with. Like sometimes it's superfluous, sometimes it's not elegant enough, whatever that happens to be, but kind of like, how do you manage that tension? And I think that also goes to kind of crosses over to the next thing that I was going to say, which is, what is the purpose of the website in the journey, as we continue to evolve? I mean, my personal hypothesis, and I don't have the data for this, but I've got like anecdotal conversations, is I don't think people are browsing websites, right? We build websites for them to be browsable, but people are kind of getting their information download from a number of places, friends and family, word of mouth, ratings, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's sort of two separate phases. What the websites used to be were both the demand generation and the demand capture. Let me generate a reason for you want to talk to me, and now fill out this form or call my phone or whatever it is to kind of capture that demand. I think increasingly the website is only serving the demand capture, and like all of the other stuff that we put around it, maybe this is a question, is it more there for the consumer, or the client to gut check themselves, like, is this company doing the thing I thought that they were doing, which is why I'm on this website in the first place? So you almost just don't want to say anything to talk them out of calling you. You just want them to kind of be able to come in.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think absolutely. I think when clients are looking, especially when I think Instagram, your website, I think that they're really just trying to see, is your message cohesive? Is your brand cohesive? Are the things that someone's referred me to, does that resonate in the same way? Do I understand you correctly? And there's a lot of places that a business or a brand can fail in a website and some of their social media presence. It's less likely that you're going to sell them purely on one channel. And I think to your point too, people are not reading every page of your website from top to bottom. It's more of a window shopping experience. They're looking through to see, like, is this a pretty facade? Do I like some of the products that sit in there? Does the broad message or like the billboard of it, does that connect with me? And if I'm excited, I'm going to probably reach out and try to talk to a human to see if that message is further reinforced. As far as where things can go sideways, through the design process, things go sideways all the time. And I try really hard I think, again, like why the strategic process is so important, as you're trying to understand what are the guardrails to the brand development and to the work that you're doing. We do a lot of work in defining a creative brief to understand those guardrails even further. There's always going to be stakeholders in a company that have emotional reasons for maybe not wanting to believe in a certain direction. And we usually try to point back to the rule set that we've created, or point back to, sometimes it's just fundamentally the needs of user experience or the needs of accessibility that has to drive the design. And so you kind of have to trust the team that you've built to both hold on to the rule set, the strategy that we've defined, as well as being experts in the standards of the work that we're executing to kind of build this product. And then sure, we can shift it a little bit here and there, but you kind of have to have hands off the wheel as a client to let this thing be created in the right way. Otherwise, the worst result that I've seen is sometimes you end up with just like a different version of the thing you had before. And it completely negates the reason why we did all this deep strategy work and why we're trying to like change your positioning or try to change your perception. So there's a certain discomfort I think every team is going to go through when you are going through like a rebrand or a website redesign. You just really need to trust the process and know that the team that you've put in place has real strategic information that's driving that result.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing that I think we've had to get better and better at, right? Is asking the client, you know, who hopefully is the decision maker and the approver, right? You know, in the best case scenario, but you know, how open are you to doing something, you know, that is very different from what you're doing right now? Or how open, you know, are you to kind of really getting outside of your comfort zone? Because what we know is change is hard. I mean, it always surprises me that we can go through the entire process sometimes and have that tacit agreement, like, yes, this is good, this is exciting, we're going to push here, we're going to move into this, we're going to narrow our focus, or we're going to go into a new market. But then when it comes, you know, boots on the ground time, okay, well, let's do this. It's very hard. I mean, this gets into something we were talking about the other day, which is, you know, there's risk in going into the unknown. Anytime you're kind of pushing a change, you're going to go, you know, you're committing to the thing that maybe you know is what you need to do. I always talk about like the Star Wars reference. It's like, I know what I need to do, but I'm not sure I have the strength to do it, right? Like people intellectually know, okay, I need to go here, but it means that you're going to sort of be taking a little bit of a leap of faith into a new direction that you've spent time, money, brain cells, like validating along the way. But when it gets time to take that leap, it's really hard to do. And so we've had to do this together a couple of times, but I'm kind of curious, you know, in terms of what do you think that we can do, you know, at the beginning of the process to prepare the client for that, or to make sure they are open, right? The worst case scenario, and I've had this happen, where we did great work, and at the end of the day, we landed exactly what you talked about, where it's like, we are right back to the beginning. We have a slightly different version of what we created, and like all of that time and money was just kind of left on the table, you know, that we didn't get to use. So what can we do sort of before the process? What can they do before the process? You know, I think the creative brief and all the strategy along the way is pretty clear, but then when it gets to that, you know, time of point of no return, right? Let's do this. You know, how do you prepare a client to be able to take that step?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think for sure there is a questionnaire and like a deep discovery process where I think you kind of uncover from an emotional level how willing the team is to challenge their previously held beliefs and their assumptions. I think that's the hardest thing, is they've gotten to where they are by following a certain belief set. And so of course it's going to be risky to change paths because they are worried that that might make them lose business. At the same time, they came to you for a very specific reason. And I think reminding them of like the core reason of why we're here at the beginning of every meeting is very important. And then always kind of like showing the layers of thinking, the logic that has led to where we are today. I love when we have our presentations, with the clients, we're always starting from the beginning, reminding everyone, and there's a lot of like back and forth to make sure that we're all on the same page, so that the result that we're showing on that day feels logical and intentional and aligned. I think through that process, maybe you can mitigate any challenges. At the same time, I do think it's important, if someone is not feeling completely comfortable, it is also, even if it is the right thing for them to do. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is like, if a brand goes through a process and just just approves the whole way, green lights everything, even though emotionally they're not feeling completely secure in that decision, it also has a terrible effect of like, sure, that might be the right thing for them to strategically do for their brand, but are they going to be speaking the message in alignment with it? Are they really going to be adopters of that idea? And so I sort of feel like the process is one part understanding who they are. We're a little bit brand therapists through that process. And then kind of reminding them and coaxing them through every step of the way until we're helping them kind of execute it as well.
Yeah, and I think that takes us, in a way back to where we started, right? Which is, as you're doing the work and you're defining your strategy, you're kind of making some agreements on this is what we stand for, and this is how we're going to deliver our message, and this is who we're going to deliver it to, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of going back and having the team, right? And team is better than an individual, right? Because there's a little bit more opportunity for validation, but also social proof, and kind of like, if we all agree, if we're all ready to take this hill together, right, we have a good chance of accomplishing our goal. But if if I've made this decision, but I still feel a little hesitant, you're not going to walk the walk. The product isn't going to kind of, manifest in the way that it's supposed to manifest. And you're going to end up with that sort of internal cultural breakdown in that, like, what we're doing, what we're believing, because what you believe is kind of where your behaviors come from. I believe this, therefore I do this. And when I do this, my perception externally is that this is who I am. Right. And so if you've got, like, yes, we've got great window dressing, but there hasn't been a fundamental, belief evolution, along the way, what you're going to have is that sort of mismatch between what you're saying and who you're being, which is kind of what makes things fall apart with clients.
Yeah. And I honestly think one of the engagements that we had that was the most valuable for building that belief was having the team actually like pitch the message back to us. I think it was like on a bi-weekly basis. They were taking the message, kind of digesting it, and then pitching it back to us. And then we were listening, seeing how it resonates, and kind of manipulating it and molding it along the way. And so I think that that's an important piece too, is that it's not just something that we're creating in a bubble and then handing over to a client, but it's something that their entire team is stress testing along the process. They're taking it out into the real world as we're developing it. And then through that, it kind of is transformative. We all kind of embody that feeling.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to, on the fly, let's see how successful I am, but I'm going to try to, a little bit encapsulate what we've talked about. You know, I think at the end of the day, what we're talking about is kind of reconciling who the people, the people make the company, right? Who the people in the company are and what they believe and what they say and how they are really the communicators of the brand, and how that fits in with, you still have to do all of your homework. You've got to do the process and you do have to have guardrails, but at the end of the day, it's people that are executing, on all of this messaging, the voice, the words, the product is coming from people, and they've got to be kind of all together. And that's what I think is going to help you have a more authentic, consistent. I mean, at the end of the day, authenticity is consistency in many ways, right? An authentic, consistent narrative that you're taking into the world. And that's what results in brand. What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely true. And yeah, consistency in behavior. Yeah, and I also just love the idea that in doing so, in having the people within your organization be as in love with your brand as you hope your customers are, they in turn can be massive centers of influence that can create unexpected value back to your company.
Absolutely.
So I think my prediction for 2024 is like, invest in your company culture, invest in the messaging internally, and I think that will have rippling effects outward.
I love it. I have nothing to add to that. Anything else that we want to summarize or take on?
No, I think that's it.
Good combo. Awesome. It was a great conversation.
Awesome.